Welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Brown, and I am with the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, Transition and Employment Projects. Teresa Baldry and I will be your moderators for today. Live captioning is available for the session. To access the captions, open the captioning link I've posted in our chat box. And again, if you are not able to see the chat box, click on the white arrow that's in the orange box toward the upper right-hand side of your screen. That will open the chat box, and then you should be able to see the link for the captions. I'll also advance the slides, and you should see in front of you on your computer screen the instructions again for how to access the captions. The captions will scroll up from the bottom, so you may want to minimize your caption box and put it at the bottom of your webinar screen. You can also close or hide the caption header and chat boxes if you're using the captioning feature. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Montana Deafblind Project, which is funded in whole or in part by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, and through a contract with Children's Special Health Services at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in the presentation do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the sponsoring departments. All attendees are currently muted. This cuts down on background noise so that everyone can hear our presenter. If you want to ask our presenter a question or make a comment, please feel free to type your question or comment into the chat box. And please note that only you, the moderators, and the presenter will be able to see what you've typed into the chat box. We will read questions out loud for the moderator, or for the presenter to answer several times throughout today's session. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and please note that it can take up to a couple of weeks for us to get those sent out. You do have to have pre-registered and requested the OPI credit in order to receive it. A certificate of attendance link will be included in the follow-up email that you receive tomorrow, and you can click on that if you would like a certificate of attendance for today's session. Today's webinar is being recorded for the Montana Deafblind Project and Transition and Employment Project's resource libraries. By participating in the webinar, you grant permission for any chats and/or questions that you submit through the webinar platform to be recorded. The video for today's webinar will be posted to the training archives pages of both of the websites that I just mentioned, and I will put those in the chat box in just a little bit. It can take a couple of weeks for us to get those videos posted. Please note, though, that the handouts for today's session are already available on the Montana Deafblind Project and the Transition and Employment Project websites, and the handouts are also available right here on the GoToWebinar platform. Again, if you open your GoToWebinar dashboard, one of the tabs you will see is Handouts, and that's where you can access the slides for today as well as the handouts that our presenter will be sharing. At the end of today's webinar, a survey will pop up. It's just 6 questions, I think, and we really ask that you take the time to answer those questions for us. We use them to determine what topics we should have presenters come and visit with you about in the future, and we also use them to try to improve the quality of our sessions. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Teresa Baldry for a brief description of the Montana Deafblind Project. Teresa?
Thank you, Kim. So this is Teresa Baldry. I am a project coordinator at the Montana Deafblind Project. The Montana Deafblind Project is a source of specialized information, technical assistance, and resources focused on improving education, inclusion, as well as college and career readiness for individuals with combined hearing and vision loss between the ages of birth through 21. The Montana Deafblind Project is located at the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities at the University of Montana. In front of the screen, you'll see now a slide from our website. We currently have 3 staff, all who work part-time. Multiple ways are on the screen in a way to connect with us. There's email, phone, fax, a contact form right on the website, as well as a Facebook group you're welcome to join. Please feel free to learn more about the project. Our areas of focus all are listed right there on the website. For a moment, I want to talk a little bit about deafblindness. The term deafblind can be misleading. It implies the complete absence of vision or hearing. In reality, only about 6% of the children who are deafblind are without any sight or hearing. While most individuals have some usable vision and or hearing, no two children with deafblindness are alike. The loss of vision and hearing, even minor losses, can greatly impact development and learning. Children who are deafblind must be taught using strategies that are responsive to their individual sensory, cognitive, and physical needs. Today, we're looking at part of our work under transition, and we're pleased to have Margaret Keener joining us today. Margaret has a bachelor's degree in social work and 30 years of experience working in the social service field. Her experiences include working with individuals with disabilities, providing benefits planning services, assisting individuals with Social Security issues, providing services to those with mental health issues, managing employment programs for the HUD-based Housing Authority, providing emergency assistance and case management services to the homeless, and working with families through Child Protective Services. Margaret currently works with individuals who have disabilities through the North Central Independent Living Services, Nichols, and has done so for over 15 years. Margaret, thank you for your time and expertise in joining us today.
Hello, thank you. It is good to be here, and it is good to be talking about Social Security. We are going to start off. I'm just getting things set up. So we're going to talk today about turning 18 and what you should know about Social Security and some of the changes that come about and some of the opportunities that come about when an individual is on Social Security as technically under Social Security's terms, a child, and then turns 18 and enters into the adult world of Social Security. And so we're going to be taking some questions periodically, and so if you have any questions, feel free to let our moderators know in the chat box. So I'm going pretty fast. So in order to better understand why, what happens when you turn 18, we need to understand the different disability benefit programs. So there's the Supplemental Security Income Program, which is SSI. That's the most common program with individuals who are under the age of 18 or who are turning 18 and applying. The second program is called the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, or SSDI, and then you can be on both SSDI and SSI at the same time. And we'll go into more of that shortly. So we're going to talk a little bit about the SSI program. And the SSI program provides income to people who are 65 or older, blind or disabled, and have limited to no income and limited financial resources. It's considered a needs-based program. And so any income or resources is going to factor into whether or not they're eligible for SSI. In 2020, the SSI payment for an eligible individual is $783 per month. And for a couple, it is $1,175 per month for an eligible couple. Just yesterday, I got the cost of living increases information and the limits that come along with those that I included in the handouts. And so you'll see how they'll be changing a little bit. Usually they'll change from year to year. So that will be going up, and that's attached for your information. But as for 2020 right now, the payment, or what they call the federal benefit rate for an individual, is $783 a month. So again, when looking at SSI, it's considered a needs-based program similar to the SNAP benefits program. So any resources or assets or savings is going to affect whether or not an individual is eligible for SSI. So the limit for an individual is $2,000. For a couple or a family, it's $3,000. With SSI comes Medicaid. If you qualify for even $1 of SSI, you qualify for Medicaid, and it's effective from the date that that person is found eligible. So if you have someone who is applying, when they put in their application that month, if they're approved, they pay them back to the month that they first applied. So if you have someone who applies this month in October 2020, but they don't get approved until January 2021, they'll pay them back to October 2020. And the Medicaid will go back to this month as well. So that's one thing that's characteristic about SSI. Is it good? Okay. So what happens when you turn 18 years old, or an individual turns 18 years old and they're on SSI? All supplemental security income recipients must have their eligibility reviewed under the adult rules. So before they're 18, they're considered to be children, and they're under the children rules, and there are separate rules for children than there are for adults. And so there are certain disabilities that are considered disabling for children that are not for adults. So when an individual turns 18 years old, Social Security is required to do a redetermination. And it's not necessarily just a review, but it's a whole new application under the adult rules. So they'll look at whether or not they qualify for benefits with the definitions for what is considered a disability as an adult. This is Social Security's responsibility to do the SSI age 18 redetermination, but an individual can prompt that to get it done as soon as possible if they wish. So there are pros and cons to doing the determination, the age 18 redetermination, and when you want to have it done. The pros are when someone is 18 and they apply for SSI, they're going to apply on their own record, and therefore any income coming in from the parents does not apply to their application. So often when someone is on Social Security under the age of 18, they will look at the household income and what parents have coming in as income, whether it's earnings from work, or if it's earnings, or if it's income coming in from a disability program. They'll look at all the income coming into the house and then factor in how many people are living in the house, and then that determines how much they're eligible for under SSI. When somebody over the age of 18 applies on their own, they just look at that individual. So therefore the parent's income does not count anymore, and they can qualify for the full federal benefit rate. Now, if they're still living with their parents and they aren't contributing to their room and board and food, then that rate will be reduced. They call that in-kind expenses, because the purpose of the SSI benefit is to help pay for living expenses. However, if they contribute towards the living expenses, like they help pay the rent or mortgage, they help pay utilities, they help pay food, they can get up to the full federal benefit rate, which is the $783. The cons, so the pro to that is that normally they're going to get more money if they're approved on their own record as an adult, because they're not factoring in the other income coming into the household from the parents. So that's the pros. The con is if the SSI beneficiary does not meet the criteria for disability under the adult rules, then that beneficiary will lose their benefits. So they'll lose that income coming in. So if there is a disability that you're not sure that will they'll qualify for now that they're an adult, the sooner they are reviewed, the sooner they may be cut off from their benefits. And so the reason why I'm letting you know this is because it's not the individual or the family's responsibility to do the application. It's Social Security's role to do that. Typically, they do that within 1 year of the 18th birthday. Sometimes it goes a little longer, but typically they do that within 1 year. For some, to initiate that and to get that going and started is going to be a positive thing because they'll get more money if they're approved. But if you're not certain if that individual is going to get more, going to get approved, then there are some who choose to wait and let Social Security initiate that instead of initiating it themselves. I hope that makes sense. Let's stop and take some questions, and then we'll get more into the age 18 redetermination.
Hi, Margaret. This is Teresa. You're doing wonderful. We don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay. All right. So I'll continue then. So to prepare for the age 18 redetermination, in this age group, this is the biggest question that I get. You know, a lot of times, usually each year I'll present at the My Transitions conference, and this is the biggest question that I'll get as far as Social Security is concerned is, you know, what happens at the age 18 redetermination? What is it about? How can we get ready for it? And so that's one of the big purposes of this presentation is to give an idea of what it is, which we've just talked about. It's an application for the adult SSI benefits under the adult SSI rules. And it's considered a new application, and typically they don't use old information, but they've got to use some of that older information somewhat, because that's where the history is going to come from. So it's good to start gathering some of that information that they're going to need beforehand so that you're ready to go, especially if you're one who wants to initiate that age 18 redetermination as soon as possible. So the first step is to educate, you know, to talk to not only the individuals who's on SSI about what the purpose of this redetermination is and why you're going to go through this process, but also the families, teachers, and vocational rehabilitation staff needs to have an understandable sense of what's going on and how the process works. And so just as I've talked earlier, you know, letting them know that we're looking at switching from the childhood side to the adult side, and we need to gather information that shows how the conditions that this individual has affects their ability to function. Another difference is on the childhood side, they look at, Social Security looks at how their conditions or disability affects their day-to-day functioning at home and at school. In the adult side, they look at how their disability affects their ability to work, affects their employment, and whether or not they're able to work at what's called substantial gainful activity. And that's what the government decides someone needs to make from working in order to make ends meet. So that's what we're looking at, is helping them to understand that portion too. So helping to gather that information of how that would impact a person's ability to work is very important. Does that make sense? Yes.
Margaret, this is Teresa. May I interrupt here with a couple of questions that have come up?
Oh, you bet.
So first one is, why do some people, and you might be addressing this later, so if you want to hold off on it, you let us know. But why do some people get switched to Medicare after they've been receiving adult SSI?
Good question. Okay, so we are going to kind of go into that a little bit later, but sometimes, here's the short answer to that. Sometimes they qualify for other programs that they might be eligible for. And here's a key thing with SSI. They will look for any other way of paying an individual before they pay them out of the SSI program. SSI is a payment or a program of last resort. So they will look at if there's another pot of money to pay them from. And sometimes they can get paid out of, say, an SSDI or a Title II program off of a parent's record. And that's an example of when they would go under Medicare rather than Medicaid. And sometimes they qualify for both.
Thank you, Margaret. I have another question that is really important in regard to the work, the history that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
So this goes to when we're looking at making sure that individuals have paid work experiences while still in school. The question is, will having a history of paid work impact a young adult's eligibility?
Typically not. They will look at that and they'll factor that in there, but in order to qualify, in order to rule out eligibility under SSI, they need to make what I just mentioned was that substantial gainful activity. So they need to make up to $1,260 a month. That's this year's substantial gainful activity. And typically, if they're in school, they're not making anywhere close to that because they're going to school and the work is part-time. So as long as it's under that $1,260 a month, it should not affect their eligibility. Did that answer the question okay?
Wonderful, Margaret. Thank you so much. And that takes care of the questions in front of us.
Okay, great. So again, educating others, letting them know that this is, you were on SSI under the childhood program, you're now applying under the adult program, and they look at how it affects their ability to function rather than day-to-day in school, but how it affects their ability and functions and their ability to function in the realm of employment and working. The second step that is very helpful is to gather information that documents that individual's disability or conditions and provides some information. When you do an application, you're giving Social Security information about your medical or mental health conditions so that they can determine whether or not you meet the criteria. So you need to give them information, and some of that information comes in really handy that comes before they turn 18 because they've had this condition ongoing or while they were in school before. So really helpful documentations would be IEPs, individual education plans through school. These are usually done in special education, those type of things. Evaluations, 504, and I should have this on this document, but I just noticed I don't, but 504 plans, which talks about accommodations for individuals in schools. Any medical reports that are pertinent to your condition and how it affects your ability to function. And then letters of support are really good to have. And so letters of support are letters from people who have interacted with you that document and support your application for disability. So we'll talk about how what you can and can't do, what an individual can and can't do, and what are some of the limitations and what are some of the strengths, even for that matter. And I do have a sample letter of support, both in this presentation, but also that you can look at. So if an individual is requesting a letter of support from someone, say a teacher that they've worked with for several years, they can give a copy of that example to say, you know, this is a letter of support that talks about, you know, how the individual is affected by their conditions. And then third, you want to gather contact information for providers, including doctors, therapists, disability professionals, teachers, or others who would have information about how the individual receiving the childhood disability functions. So I'm going to show you some of the forms that Social Security uses, and then also the example letter of support to give an idea. So I'm going to back up a little bit when we talk about gathering some of the information like the IEPs and the evaluations. What I would recommend is I would always recommend that you save them because they're handy for a variety of things. But with Social Security, if you can save their junior and their senior individual education plans, and then any evaluations done. These are example of evaluations that one of the school psychologists made up for this presentation that talks about an individual named Janie Doe and what her educational goals are, strengths, preferences, and what they're working on. And these are really good to have and get to Social Security because it shows they've already got services in place due to the disability. Also, evaluating reports or testing or medical information. I will tell you that getting some of that testing through the school, especially, you know, their junior or senior year, is going to be much easier than trying to do it once they've graduated from school. For example, an IQ test, the school can do it very readily, and typically they want a current or an IQ test that's been done fairly recently. If you have an IQ test that's 5 years old, they're going to want to see something a little more up to date. And that can be requested through the school and the school psychologist, and they can do that relatively easily. However, once they're over the age of 18 and out of schools, it is very difficult to get an IQ test. And you have to really jump through some ropes. So by working with your school professionals, and when you go to those IEP meetings and keeping copies of those, you know, keep those copies and even, you know, stick it away in a folder or something to get ready for that age 18 redetermination. And especially the last couple of years, showing what's been going on is really helpful. And if there is testing that needs to be done, if there hasn't been testing in a while, asking them to do those tests, as I said, the junior or senior year is really, really helpful. And really makes it easier to go through that process. So this is also a form that's used by Social Security that guides people on what they need to gather as far as information to present to Social Security for the application. And I literally use this form with everyone that I work with in helping them to apply for Social Security disability. So it talks about the conditions. What are the conditions that are disabling to that individual? And it's important to put down all conditions. There's some people who would say, you know, well, we have a diagnosis of a cognitive disorder. and the person might have asthma as well, but they don't put down the asthma. Well, if the asthma is aggravated, it's going to be tougher for that person with the cognitive disorder to function. So I put down all disabling or health conditions, and I would recommend that. They do have some questions like what's your height and what's your weight, and but medical sources, I would say from the time their 16th birthday, any medical doctors that they have, their contact information, when they first started seeing them, and then when we go to apply, the last that they started to see them, or the last date that they had seen them, or if they're seeing them ongoing. They want a list of medications that they're on the time of application. So you don't have to track that for 2 years, but at the time that they apply, if you have the list of the medication, why you take it, who it's prescribed by, and they also ask about side effects. That's not on this form, but that is something that they ask about. So those factors you're going to want to list down. Any medical tests, again, from 16 on, if they have some big tests or if they have some big diagnoses before the age of 16, like if an individual at a young age, say 6 years of age, has a traumatic brain injury, of course you're going to want to put that down because that's going to be the date when things started. But as far as the recent testing, you're going to want to look at those 2 years before they turn 18. And then you're going to look at the job history, and this goes back to the question that came before of when they're working, even when it's in the school, you want to have a job title, you want to have a type of business when you were working, but you want to also look at the number of hours in a day that they worked and the number of days per week. And then their amount of pay, and that helps them to decide whether or not they're above that substantial gainful activity or not. And typically, if they've been in school, they're not even close to that substantial gainful activity because, again, that's one of their activities. So, and here's that sample letter of support that I put together. So I did it again for this Janie Doe, I put that this letter was to express support in her application for Social Security, how long I had known Janie and what her diagnosis is. And then I put that in my work, how I've noticed and observed her diagnosis or her condition affecting her ability to function, and gave some examples such as having to repeat instructions, having to go a little bit slower, having to break things down into smaller steps, those type of things. And then I always put down that if they have any questions, they're free to contact me. So, but a lot of times if you're asking someone for a letter of support, if you have something to give them that gives them an idea of what's being looked for, makes it a lot easier on that individual. And again, I've put that in as one of the attachments that's not on the slide for you to refer to, or if you want to give to someone as a sample. Any questions?
Thanks, Margaret. This is Teresa. I was waiting with a few, so I'm going to jump into a couple that tie right back to what you were talking about.
Okay.
The question is, who is responsible for gathering the information to send into Social Security Administration?
Ultimately, the young person, but typically the parents will take the lead and help them through that. So that is one thing that's a really good point to bring out, is that also all of the independent living centers in the state, we have 4. There's the one that I work for that's in north central Montana. We're based out of Black Eagle, which is right next to Great Falls, and we cover 17 counties. There is one that's in the Billings area and covers, I believe, 18 counties up in that area. We have one in Helena that's centered in Helena and covers several counties, and another one in Missoula. So all of those centers will help with the Social Security application process or the age 18 redetermination process. So you don't have to do it by yourself if you don't want to. But usually when I meet with somebody who needs help, you know, I'll talk to them about, okay, you know, do you have your, you know, as this individual's been going through school, have you kept their IEPs? Let's talk to the school about doing a new evaluation or assessment, particularly, you know, if there's an IQ test that's needed or a psychological test that's needed. It's a lot easier to get it done in the schools than it is outside, and then you're ready to go with some big sources of information. And so typically I will work with the youth and their parents in regards to that. And then what we do is we will gather that information and hang on to it until we're ready to set up the appointment. Now, according to the rules, you can call and set up the appointment the month of that individual's birthday. However, I have heard that some people have run into problems with some of the local Social Security offices not allowing them to do it until that youth has turned 18. So technically you can do it if they have a birthday on the 20th, you can do it. You can call them on the 1st of that month and set up the appointment, but sometimes you do run into they'll make you wait till the 20th until that birthday. So when it is time, and again, this is if you're thinking, okay, I'm pretty certain that they're going to qualify under the adult rules. So I'm going to go ahead and get this done as soon as possible, because the person may be getting $200 or $300 on their SSI because of parents' income. But as soon as they get determined under their own record, they can go up to the 783, and they can get that amount and help contribute to the household income. And usually what I'll do is encourage people, you know, some people say, oh no, we just cover it. And if they're comfortable doing that, that's fine. But, you know, I let people know, would it be nice to, you know, have a little bit more money coming into the household and to have some of those expenses offset by the Social Security payment, because she or he is eligible for it if they contribute to the household expenses. And that can be done in a couple different ways. It can be done either as a rental agreement, or just showing that, okay, there's 4 people in the household and the rent or mortgage is divided between 4, and this is what that's for, and here's the utilities, that's a 1/4 of that, and here's the food, there's a 1/4 of that, and so you can do it either way. Plus, get that young person involved in that, and it helps them to learn and see how to prepare and how to budget for later on down the road. Because if a person is not contributing to the household, at some age, they're most likely going to be moving into their own living arrangements. Many of them, some may not, and they'll be eligible for that anyway. And if they already have an understanding about paying towards those living expenses, that just puts them, in my opinion, ahead of the game. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Margaret. Sorry, I do have some more questions coming in. This one is in particular in regard to income for children. So although we're talking about adults, this is regard to children. Is the $3,000 income limit per month gross or net pay? Would a family of 4 receive a full amount of SSI for 2 disabled children as long as the parents / household income is under the 3,000?
So the 3,000 is a resource limit. So that's going to be any money that's in savings, or if the parents own a vehicle and then a second vehicle, they usually don't count the first vehicle, but the second vehicle that's of less value, they'll count, or if they own property, or if they have stocks or any type of asset or resource. That's the limit for that. So that's where the 3,000 comes in. What they do, if you have an individual who is applying for SSI under the children's rules, they'll look at how many people are in the household, how much income is coming in, and they also look at where the income is coming from. If it's coming from work, it counts less than if it's coming from something other than work. It makes a big difference. They call that countable income. And if it's coming from work, they actually get some extra credit there that it counts about half of what it would if it were not income from employment. And so that's what they look at and determine for whether or not someone's getting a payment. However, if that young person turns 18, they don't look at that extra income anymore. They just look at what that 18-year-old is getting. And then also what their living arrangements are going to be if they're going to be contributing to the household. So that goes away at the age of 18 if they're approved.
The next two should be quick questions. What is the name of the center that helps with applying for Social Security income application in Helena?
Okay, that's Montana Independent Living Project. And I can, if you don't mind me turning my head, I can give you the 1-800 number for that. That's 1-800-735-6457.
And when we're talking about a redetermination, does that appointment need to be face-to-face or can it be a Zoom meeting?
They don't do Zoom meetings yet. It can be a face-to-face. They do some of the Zoom type meetings, but that's usually for appeals and stuff like that. Most of them are over the phone right now, because right now they are not open to the public. And so if we set an appointment, it's over the phone. And like if I'm working with somebody and I'm helping through the application process, we do basically a conference call where all three of us are on the phone. So the Social Security staff, the individual who's applying and their parent, usually, and then myself. And so it's a three-way phone call. And what we go over is exactly what's in that Social Security form, what I've talked about. The conditions, the medical contacts, or the mental health contacts, the medications, the tests, and the work history. That's exactly what goes over it. It's gone over in the application. So we try to be as prepared for that application, and by filling those out, you're as prepared for that application as you can be.
I have one more question with SSDI, but I'm going to hold it and let you move forward with the presentation.
Okay, yeah, because we're, sometimes it goes fast, the time, sometimes not as much, but we're moving pretty fast today. So if you have an individual, if you have a person who's just turned 18, but they weren't on SSI before the age of 18, a lot of the time it's because their parents had too much money coming into the household, either in income or resources. They were over the limit. So now they turn 18, they're not looking at the household income coming in, even if that person is staying in the household. They're going to look at what that individual's income and assets and resources are at the age of 18. So a lot of time, if they haven't qualified under the age of 18, they can apply and qualify to be eligible as an adult once they turn 18. So again, there's a new application. They're not going to necessarily reevaluate from when they were under the SSI as a child, but it will be a whole new application. And the gathering of information that I talked about is going to be applicable and going to be helpful for that as well. So that's something to look at, is whether or not, once they turn 18, they can probably apply, and if they meet the criteria of it significantly impacting their ability to work, then a lot of times they will go ahead and qualify and can be on now. And with the same rules that I had mentioned before. Okay, so we're going to look at SSDI. So SSDI, typically someone under the age of 18 does not get SSDI, and usually if they do, it's not because of their disability, but it's because of a parent's disability or death. So typically if you have a young person under the age of 18, they are going to be, and they're getting a Social Security benefit, it's going to be SSI. But we're going to look at SSDI because there is a program that looks at when the young person became disabled, and if their parent is collecting or getting SSDI or retirement benefits or has passed away, they can apply to be on their parent's record and earning Social Security on their parent, or getting Social Security on their parent's record, which will a lot of times give them more money. And that's when you're going to see them qualifying for Medicare benefits. So the SSDI program that pays benefits to adults, so people who are over the age of 18, who have a disability that began before that individual was 22 years old. So before the young person was 22 years old, if they have a disability and their parent is receiving SSDI because of their disability, retired and collecting Social Security retirement, or if the parent has passed away, they may be eligible for benefits under the parent's record. So this is going back to the question where it talked about how come they might get Medicare. This is how come. And then again, a lot of times this is going to, all the time it's going to give more money than what you would get just on SSI. And it's going to be based off the record that the parent earned and how much they earned. And with SSDI, the amount of money that they get is based off of how much the parents worked and paid into the system. Or if you're an insured worker, it's based off of what you've worked and paid into the system. So this is something to factor in and look at. And this is one source that if they qualify under this benefit, they're going to pull from this benefit before they pull from the SSI. So that's a factor that can be looked at. Another factor with this is that when you're younger, it doesn't take as long to qualify for SSI as it would, or SSDI as it would if you're older. So SSDI is based off of how much an individual has worked and paid into the system. It's based off of FICA taxes. So if you've worked and you've looked at that pay stub and it says FICA on there under the taxes being taken out, that's SSI or SSDI, and that's what's being paid towards it. That's the premium that's being paid towards SSDI. So what that's intended towards is if you become disabled and meet the criteria, you can draw off that record if you have so many credits. For a person my age, it has to be 40 credits, which is 10 years worth of work. You can earn up to 4 credits a year. You have to earn about $1,000 before it counts as a credit. For someone who's under the age of 26, it's less credits. So if you get someone who starts working when they're 16, depending on how much they work, they can qualify for some SSDI in less than 2 years. So that's where you might have someone who gets SSDI and SSI. So this is off their own SSDI record. So you've got the childhood disability benefit, and then you've got if they've earned enough on their own record. Now, it's pretty rare to have someone who has a disability and has disability since they were quite young to earn enough, but I've seen it once in a while. So it doesn't have, it's not real common, but it is possible. So that's one way to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to switch a little bit, and we're going to talk about work incentives. And I'm just going to kind of go ahead through this because we're running out of time. So work incentives are special rules that make it possible for someone to work and for them to do so successfully while on SSI or SSDI and transitioning off. So this is a list of the work incentives that are under the SSI program. I'm going to talk about a few of them a little more in detail because they're really applicable to youth. We also have the SSDI work incentives. And so that would be a childhood disability benefit, someone who's getting a childhood disability benefit under the Title II program off their parents' record, or if they did work and earn enough to start with some SSDI. And then there's some work incentives that apply to both benefit programs. And so those are a list of some of those. And if you have detailed questions about those, my contact information is at the end, and you can contact me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. So we're going to look at some of the key ones that are applicable to students. The first one is called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. They actually have it as an acronym. It's the SEIE exclusion. There's lots of acronyms in Social Security. But basically what it is, if you have a person who's younger than 22 years old, regularly attends school, and when they say regularly attend school, they're talking about 8 hours a week. Social Security will not count earnings from employment for that person. So, in other words, Social Security won't reduce the student's SSI payment. There are limits to this, work incentives. In 2020, they can earn up to $1,900 a month. This is typically looked at during, like, say, a summer job. And there's a yearly limit of $7,670 per year. So this is a really good work incentive for someone who is in school, and you can do this starting at the age of 16. So if they're in high school and they're working a summer job, full-time summer job, or if they're working and making or working a after-school job for a couple hours a day, this is where this can be applied. You do have to request it, and that's kind of the secret, is that they won't automatically do this and assume that they're going to school. You have to show that they're going to school, and you have to request it. But, for example, I had a young man who worked in the summer at the senior center in his small town. And because he was in school, and we could show that he went to school the semester before, and that he was working during the summer, and that he was enrolled in school for the next coming school year, we were able to, he was earning about $500 a month. We were able to request that they not count that $500, and his SSI payment did not go down at all. And that went through just fine. So even though he was getting an extra $500 in wages, his Social Security stayed at the $783 because of that work incentive. So another work incentive that's key is called a PASS plan, and it's a plan to achieve self-support. This is a person who's at least 15 years old and has another source of income that's coming in. It can be any other source of income. It can be a job. It can be a trust fund. It can be from parents contributing to that. So this is another source of income and it has to pay towards a vocational goal. So this could be money for tuition, supplies, books, services, anything that might be needed for that person to work successfully and get into a job and reduce their dependence on the Social Security system. The income that's being contributed, whether it's from a job or another source, won't be counted against their Social Security payments, their SSI payments, and their SSI payment will not go down. One thing that is really good about this one is that if you get somebody who gets both SSI and SSDI, they can apply their SSDI as that additional income, have their SSI payment go up, and use that income towards that vocational goal. So, for example, I had a person who wanted to be a vendor at city programs and school sports events, whatnot. And so she worked with vocational rehabilitation, who helped buy her a trailer. She needed something to haul that trailer. So we wrote a plan for a pass plan. And that pass plan allowed her to make larger payments towards a truck that would haul that trailer. It paid for the truck payments, her insurance, and then also money for repairs. And she was able to make bigger truck payments and pay off that truck within 2 years to haul the trailer. They also allowed her to reinvest any profits that she made into getting inventory, whatnot. So, and I really have to hurry. So the last one's called the 301 payment. And this is a real key one, especially if you have an individual that you're not sure is going to be able to be approved under the adult rules. If you're working with an employment network, the biggest employment network here in the state of Montana is vocational rehabilitation. And you've got IPE, an individual plan of employment in place, you can request that they continue getting payments, even if they no longer meet Social Security's definition of disability, that they continue their getting those payments until the plan is done. So those are the key ones that I wanted to talk to you about as far as work incentives go. And I don't know if we have time for questions or not.
Hi, Margaret. It's Teresa, and there's one that I think is a benefit to the group, so I want to make sure I ask you. Do we need to include unpaid jobs in the job history? For example, a work-based study job at the student's high school?
No, if it's an unpaid job, you don't need to include that in the work history. What they look at, and here's the general rule of thumb, if they're paid and they have taxes taken out for that employment or that work experience, that's what's going to decide whether or not it would count under Social Security rules. So if they say have an internship and they're not paid for that internship, they don't need to report that. That's not counted. But if they get a stipend under that internship and no taxes have been taken out, then they still don't have to report that. But if they get paid and taxes are taken out, then yes, that does count.
And one more here that I think is a benefit to the group. The rest will have to respond to via email. Can Social Security income money go directly into an ABLE account, or does a certain amount need to be spent each month on expenses?
That's a good question. The ABLE accounts are a little bit different because the ABLE accounts you can use to help with monthly expenses. And so you can put money into there for monthly expenses, but the Social Security is designed to pay for those monthly expenses, especially SSI. So I would say if I were to venture a guess, I would say you need to have some monthly expenses come out of it. But let me check into that, because I don't like to guess when it comes to people's Social Security. And if you could write me an email, on the board is an email that is my email address, and just send me an email or give me a call and let me know who you are. I can check with Social Security regarding that. Because that's a new question I haven't gotten before. Usually it's money coming from another source being deposited, but I know you can deposit money from Social Security, because if you don't spend that amount, you don't want it to necessarily build up an account and go over your resource limit, but ABLE accounts don't count under the resource limit.
And this is Teresa. I'll be glad to check with my resources connected with the National ABLE Resource Center as well. So Margaret and I will partner and make sure we get an answer to you.
That would be great. And if people didn't get a chance to ask their question, or if you want to talk a little bit more in detail, please feel free to contact me. If I'm not available, leave a message, because a lot of times I'm in appointments or on the phone with someone else. But if I'm available, I'm happy to talk to you. And if you leave a message, I will call back. Just let me know that you were on the presentation and you have a question. So you can either call or email me, and both of those avenues worked. Real quick, if I could just show one more thing. So yesterday we got sent what's called a fact sheet, and it talks about the cost of living adjustments from this year to next year. And part of the reason why that's important is that on the cost of living adjustments, it adjusts some of those work incentives too. So if you remember, I was talking about substantial gainful activity, and that being $1,260 a month this year. In January, that'll go up to $1,310. And then they have a substantial gainful activity for individuals who are statutorily blind, and that goes up as well. And then the SSI rate, the federal benefit rate, is going from $783 to $794. So it's good information to have. So that's on there too. I would suggest you grab that. And now I'll be quiet so Kim can say her stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. This is Kim, and just a reminder that a short survey will pop up on your screen as soon as you exit the webinar. If you don't have time to take that today, the survey link will be in the thank you follow-up email you receive tomorrow. So you don't need to take the survey twice, either today or tomorrow, either way, but please do take it. Our next webinar will take place on October 20th from 4 to 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And the title, this is a long title, but it's Confronting Challenges as a Pandemic Technology Moderator, Strategies for Engaging Students with Disabilities in Virtual Learning and the Use of Netiquette. We do have the registration for that open and available on our website, so please sign up. Should be a great session. The recording from today's webinar will be posted within the next 2 weeks to the 2 different website pages that I've put in your chat box, the Montana Deaf Blind project website and the Transition and Employment Projects website. And the handouts are already posted on those sites. Thank you so much, Margaret, for the fabulous information that you shared with us today. I wish we had grabbed you for an hour and a half. We could have gone 2 or 3 hours, I think. You have so much to share. Thank you, Teresa, for co-moderating. Thank you to our captioning professional. And thanks to all of you for participating and for staying a few minutes past our stopping time. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.